Hello, I'm David King with a cool little story to share about this little car here. I acquired it about 3 years ago in a most unexpected way. My wife and I live in a beautiful second-story apartment, and when we moved in about 7 years ago, I noticed this car sitting down in the garage next door. It was only visible from our kitchen window because there was a tall fence separating the two houses. There was another car next to it, a vintage Chevy Caprice. The garage door was always halfway open because the longer Chevy stuck out of the short garage. Anyway, I could see it was a Karmann Ghia by the rear end. A '67 Bug was the first car I learned to drive. My buddy and I used to sneak his mother's Beetle out at night and drive around the back roads in Wisconsin drinking beer. I've owned 3 VW Bugs since then, and anyone who's ever driven one knows they're fun little cars to drive. A cult kind of vehicle evolving ever since it was conceived in the 1930s. I always liked the styling of the Karmann Ghia, and I wouldn't mind having one, but I never actually sought out to buy one. I've been a car lover forever, beginning with model cars as a child, and I've fixed up many old cars in my life, last one being this '58 Mercedes, which I worked on for 25 years. So in my latter years, I kind of retired from ever starting another car project. All of us who truly love fixing up old cars knows how our enthusiasm to resurrect these old classics can sometimes overwhelm our ability. So I've learned to hinder my passion when I see restoration opportunities. Anyway, I gazed at this little Ghia sitting there day after day every year, always pondering the potential of what appeared to be a pretty good specimen for restoration. And clearly nobody was attending to it at all. You know, occasionally the renter next door would pull out his Caprice out of the garage for a drive, but he always ignored the Ghia, which led me to believe it wasn't his. After about 4 years of living there, my wife and I saw the owner of the rental house out front doing some maintenance work in the yard. We said hello and chatted a bit, a nice elderly man named Chuck. So I casually inquired about the car out back, and he told me it came with the house when he bought it 35 years ago. The previous homeowner was unable to take the Ghia to his new home in Texas, so he included it in the sale of the house for an extra $500. And it sat there ever since, so Chuck didn't know any history or condition of the car, and never got the title either. So I jokingly said to Chuck, "Are you ever going to do anything with it, or are you just going to let it rot in there?" And he said, "Well, I've always wanted to, but I just haven't had the time." Well, we all know how that is, especially these days. Chuck said, "Why, are you interested?" I said, "Well, I don't know, maybe." I wasn't really interested in another project, like I said, but I certainly saw an opportunity to make a few dollars on a possible resale. I said, "Why? What do you want for it?" And he said, "Well, how about $500? That's what I paid for it." After my initial shock of his offer, and while I was still trying to hold my composure, I casually said, "Well, I'll go take a look at it and let you know." After all these years, I have a pretty good eye for the value of old cars. I figured that car had to be worth quite a bit more than $500, regardless of whether it ran or not. So my excitement grew even more about the possibility of reselling it. The next morning, I went into the garage and looked it over. To my surprise, it was also a convertible. So I know those are worth a lot more than the hardtop. It was filthy dirty, as you would expect after sitting all those years. And there happened to be a couple of workmen in the house that day, and they helped me push it outside so I could get a better look at it. Another surprise was it appeared to be in original condition. There was a little rust on it from driving in the winter here, but not too bad. And the only thing missing were the side mirrors. I recall that being a common issue for the VWs back then. Well, I was convinced then and there that this little treasure was worth my time and effort to locate a buyer for it. Lord knows we could certainly use the extra money, right? So I shot several photos of the car while I had it out of the garage to show any prospective buyers. Aside from being filthy, it was the perfect project car for someone. So we pushed it back in the garage, and I went to work on my computer to find a buyer for it. The very first website that caught my eye was a big exotic car company in Beverly Hills. So I called him up, and almost immediately I was talking to the owner of the company. Well, he seemed very interested in the car, not knowing any condition or history of it. He obviously asked me what I wanted for it. And I said, well, $3,500 seemed like a fair price to me. He didn't bat an eye at the price and requested my photos. It wasn't more than an hour later when his secretary called me back with a contract and to arrange a time to pick it up. Obviously, I underpriced the car, but that was okay. It would be the easiest $3,000 profit I ever made. But this deal seemed to be moving awfully fast, though, which made me a little uncomfortable. So I told her, let me talk to my wife before I commit to the sale. Besides, I hadn't actually bought the car from Chuck yet. But little did I know what was coming. Early next morning, my regular prayer time, I began asking God if this is something that I should get involved in. For 4 years, I was fine just observing this little gem from my window. And then all of a sudden, it was about to impact my life in a very uncertain way. And whenever we're in a situation that we do not have peace in our soul, praying to God is always the best course of action. As I waited to hear from God, I told my wife about the opportunity I had to make a nice profit on the Ghia next door. Expecting a burst of joy, I saw a bit of discontentment in her. I said, "You look disappointed. What's wrong?" She said, "Well, I've been seeing that little Ghia out the window for a long time, always daydreaming about how fun it would be cruising around, going on picnics, maybe a car show here and there." She also owned a Bug back in the day, so she knows the joy of the VW cult. Anyway, I was delightfully surprised as she went on telling me how she had been praying to God for something fun to add to our marriage. And she felt that Ghia down in the garage might be the perfect spark to putting some excitement back in our lives. Well, I saw God's answer to my prayer right before my eyes. Here I was expecting her to be excited about money and profits by selling the Ghia, when all the while she was praying about growing our love for one another by cruising around the countryside enjoying life in a fun little sports car. My heart immediately sank with conviction. I realized that my perspective on the true meaning of marriage slipped away from me. It was a good reminder of what's really important. Needless to say, another car project was born right then and there. So I thought. I left Chuck a voicemail that I wanted the car, but he didn't return any of my calls for several days. Well, I began assuming he probably realized he was a little hasty with the $500 offer. So my excitement began to spoil as this sweet dream appeared to fade away. So after about a week, I thought, well, I'll try one more time. And he finally answered and agreed to complete the sale. Hallelujah! I don't know if my persistence helped him honor his word, but it probably didn't hurt. That was about 3 years ago, and I have never enjoyed working on a car more than this little treasure right here. Not only did God answer both of our prayers individually, He gave me the joy of working on a car again, which I love, but more importantly, an opportunity to bring joy into the heart of my wife. Happy wife, happy life, right? For her, it was about reigniting our relationship through the joy of weekend outings and picnics together, which we have done several times now. Who would ever thought that that little car down there would someday bring so much joy into two people's hearts and change their lives forever? God, that's who.